All right, Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft review. They had a unique draft here, only 6 selections, but I think they made the most of them in certain areas. You never love when you are below. Usually you can get away with 7. You don't really want to be lower than that, but ultimately, I do think they made some really interesting picks here. So let's talk about those picks. First, I have to explain what the chart you see next to me means. So the first number is where those players were drafted, then the name of the player, the position of the player, and finally, where that player ranked on the consensus big board. You see just 3 different positions for Tampa Bay. 2 wide receivers, 2 corners, and 2 edges. Simple enough. The Emeka Egbuka pick was certainly a bit of a controversial one. For one thing, not everyone had him as a top 20 prospect. Now, receivers are notoriously a bit fluky in some people. People tend to have very different evaluations. Also, they tend to not always have the highest hit rate in round 1, and they tend to have a pretty higher hit rate in later rounds. But there still is, a lot of good players you can get in the first round, of course. And quite frankly, you kind of just trust Jason Light knows what he's doing when it comes to receivers, right? He drafted Mike Evans. He drafted Chris Godwin. He's, had a pretty good hit rate. Even some of the, other guys he's drafted, like Jalen McMillan, have at least been solid role players. So, yeah, there's kind of 2 ways to take this. One, is he a good enough player? Well, he's a good player. Sure, most people had him as a first-round talent. He goes in the first round. I think, and again, we trust Jason Light that he knows what he's doing, and Egbuka is worth the 19th overall pick. Then there's should they have drafted a receiver in round 1? Your passing attack is already so good, but I compared this on Twitter to what the Philadelphia Eagles do with their defensive line, which is, listen, you don't just have your 3 wide receivers out there every snap. You're going to have to rotate guys. And so this way, when Mike Evans comes off the field, it's not like the whole offense is going to go to hell because you still have Godwin and Egbuka on the field. And then you take Godwin off and put Evans back in. Then you take Egbuka off and you keep Evans and Godwin in, right? Like you can keep everyone fresh that way and still have other players get snaps. He's going to get playing time, and listen, Godwin and Evans are both in their 30s. Godwin has had multiple notable injuries. Mike Evans has been able to avoid too many huge injuries, which is part of how he's kept that 1,000-yard streak going. But again, guys go down, guys miss time, and having a good passing attack with Baker Mayfield, who loves to put the ball in harm's way sometimes, you have to make sure you have the receivers to make it work. We saw how in Carolina, when they didn't have receivers, how bad it was, right? So you got to make sure that you play to your strengths. Your strengths is passing attack. I'm totally fine with this move. Okay, spent a while on the first pick. Let's move on to first Benjamin Morrison, a corner who is projected to go right around when he ultimately ends up going. He's an interesting player. So he is a very physical corner, kind of fits the Todd Bowles scheme that way. The concern is he has had some hip injuries, and he's already not the fastest corner. So I think the concern is if he's not the shiftiest and not the fastest, he is going to have to rely a bit on his height and his physicality to make things work. What I like about this, though, is you don't need him to come in and play right away. My biggest critique of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers these past couple of years has been cornerback depth. And so making sure they address that, getting a guy who has potential to be a starting caliber corner as a backup, I just think is smart. They needed another outside corner option, and now they have it. So if Jamel Dean gets hurt again, which is prone to happen, they can survive that, right? So to me, it's the position I really like, but also I think he's a player who is worth a mid-second round pick, so it kind of works both ways. They also went after Jacob Parrish, who is kind of more of a speed guy, actually. A lot of people have speculated that he might be more of a nickel because he is only 5'10", so not getting the tallest guy here. But ultimately, it's just another guy who can just do certain things and cover certain types of players. So again, you're building the depth in a position grouping that they needed to fill depth in. And that's personally what I like about all of this. They then drafted David Walker, who was an edge rusher, who was Pro Football Focus's #1 edge rusher in football last year. Now, he plays at lower competition, so that's going to help bump up the numbers. But still, it is at least somewhat promising that he was able to dominate at the FCS level. And we know Jason Light does like his FCS players. He's not afraid to go this route. in later rounds like this, because sometimes they turn into really good players. So it's not a horrible idea. I'm very fascinated in what he can do. Little bit of a weird body type at 260, 6'2". So we'll see if he can translate. There is going to be a huge jump from what he was playing to the NFL, but ultimately there's reason to be excited here. And again, he doesn't need to come in and be a starter, but can he come in and be a role player? I think they hope Hassan Reddick can show some stuff. You're getting another guy in the building, so now it's Yaya Diaby, Chris Braswell, Anthony Nelson, Hassan Reddick, and they got 2 more edge rushers here. That's a lot of players, quite frankly, to rotate in and out. They then went with Elijah Roberts at pick 157, who is an interesting player. I think, so he's 6'4", 295, so I don't really see him as an edge, even though that is what his drafted position is. I think you probably move him into a defensive end. Oh, I'm out of focus. Okay, I'm back. Probably move him into it as a defensive end role in a 3-4, have him be more of an inside guy, which Tampa Bay, I think, could use another guy in the mix there. You have Kalijah Cansey, you have Vita Vea, Logan Hall, I think, was a nice role player. Even Greg Gaines, I don't hate, but they could use an upgrade there, I think. So, if he can be that cool, if not, he's at least another body in the mix there. And then finally, Tez Johnson, the wide receiver who was projected to go 128th, they get him at 235th. And the reasoning is this is a small player. So speed guy, which, hey, I would hope so if you are what his height and weight is. He's 5'10", 165. So yeah, that is an outlier among outliers. And hey, Devonta Smith is a very small guy. He made it work out, but ultimately, you very rarely see someone. You very rarely see someone like Tez Johnson be able to really, to work. That being said, he's pretty good and was pretty consistently a quality wide receiver at Oregon. He does have, speed. He can move well, and I do think that, honestly, he would even quite frankly, he kind of checked every box in college. Like when he was out there, he could, make tough catches. He can do things like that. So the thing is, usually, to pick 235, you're like, okay, could this be a special teams guy? I don't know if you would want him as a special teams guy, given the fact that he is, not that big. Do you want the wear and tear? But to me, this is essentially just Jason Light taking a flyer on hey, let's just get a guy who's pretty good at football. And you know what? Antoine Winfield was undersized. It worked out okay. Not quite to this degree, but still, let's just get another guy, and maybe he can be someone who could do the Trey Palmer role, but maybe be more consistent at it if everything goes perfectly. That's probably the logic there. So ultimately, this is a draft I do really like. I would have liked to see us, and I don't love drafting for need, but everyone says don't draft for need unless it's your team and then you want to draft for need. I would have liked to get an off-ball linebacker at some point. I guess they're okay with Anthony Walker and Cervanka Dennis being that. We'll see. I do ultimately feel, though, the rest of this defense should be much better. Getting the depth was the biggest issue. Last year, I think the biggest issue was not necessarily the starting 11, but kind of the players behind that. Getting more quality players behind that should go a long way, while still getting a guy on offense to make sure that they can consistently put up points. So should be a fun watch next year. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.